Welcome to Literary Deep Dives and Discussions with me, A.L. Liskey, the author of the Unseen Operative series. Today, I am with my guest, Louella Ranes, who is the author of the Yiddera, or the Demons of Yiddera series. Welcome, Louella.
Welcome. Thank you for inviting me.
Just to kind of dive into things, Louella is the author of a series called The Demons of Yiddera. Her first book, A Demon's Fascination, is a little bit of what we'll touch on today. And to kind of start out, I do want to say that I was very impressed by particularly your style of writing. I've read several other indie authors, and, every author has their own art to how they write a book. But what really caught me with yours was that you write a little more dense than others do. And I appreciate that because I happen to be a dense writer. I was captivated by how similar our styles are as far as having dialogue and then these strips of just good narration that really glide into the story with great detail. Has that always been your style of writing?
No, actually, when I first started writing, all I could do was dialogue. That was it. But then as a teenager, I entered a competition for writing and was like, I'm going to do something a little different. So I wrote nothing but narrative. And that one actually got more interest than just dialogue. So I started gearing my writing towards the narrative.
I also like dialogue. I would just write nothing but dialogue all day if I could, but that doesn't a story make. So
yeah. I was going to say sometimes that narrative is so much more important than the dialogue. It gives context to the dialogue.
Very much so. And I guess the difficult part as authors is we see the scene in our heads. And so we're writing the dialogue, and to us, sometimes it's already there. The narration is already there, but the problem is the reader doesn't actually see what's in our heads. So we have to put it down.
Exactly.
What a pain. Yeah, that's definitely been my struggle. I have my editor is always saying, where is the main character in this space? You're giving all these great details, but where is she? And I'm like, what do you mean, where is she? She's right there. And no, she's not.
I go through that same thing. It's like, what do you mean I didn't describe that? Can't you just see it?
Would you say in terms of reading that you tend to read books kind of like the one that you've written?
No. That sounds funny. I read all genres, but I tend to gravitate more towards the historical romances, which is very different from what I write. But again, I do read all genres. When I started writing, I set out to write just a historical romance kind of thing, but I just can't. My writing tends to go more towards the fantasy.
That makes so much sense to me. It really does. I can see how it translates over as well, having read your book, that, the generational aspect of it, history makes sense. But I'm like yourself. I don't read thrillers often. When I do, I like them, but I don't read as much mystery and thrillers. I am mostly a nonfiction reader in philosophy and theology. So writing fiction was completely outside of me. And then when I did write it, in my head, I thought this is just mystery. And my editor says, no, this is a speculative mystery thriller. The story just did it just come to you, or did it flow as you were writing it?
That's a good question. Book 1 was the last book in the series that I wrote.
Whoa, okay.
Yeah. So it's a 4-part series total. I have all of the books written. Book 2, those characters I've thought about and known since I was a teenager, but I never knew quite where to put them and how to write them and, that kind of thing. And so when I decided to actually sit down and write, and I do it as a hobby, and I never intended to publish. So I just sat down to write for myself. And I wrote book 2 and I wrote book 3. I started book 4 and I was like, oh, nobody's going to understand anything I wrote. I can't even understand what I wrote if I don't some background. And so book 1 is basically the last book I wrote to give background and more information of why book 2, 3, and 4 happened.
Has that set you up for quick publishing then, because you already have the subsequent stories?
My goal is to publish a book every 6 months. And so book 3 comes out in May, and then book 4 will come out kind of in November. But it also gives me time to continue writing other stories without feeling under pressure. Yeah.
I wish I had used the same technique, because I'm in the struggle of book 2 is all I have to do is read through the final edit and it's ready to go. And I'm just struggling. And I've been working on this project for 7 months now and want to write another book.
I get it.
I better take a note of that for future. That is just brilliant.
My current work in progress, the WIP, whatever you want to call it, is going to be a duology. And those two I'm writing together as well. And I tend to write, I can't write one book at a time. I have to to write them together to make sure my timelines are correct, and
Mm.
a little OCD about it.
You know, I greatly appreciate that. Keeping track of timelines is a huge part. Like, again, a connection that we share because you do have that generational aspect in your book. But I as well, with the second book that I have a novella coming out alongside it that takes place of a side character's story with the whole thing kind of intermingled. It's a standalone, but it has to relate. So I have to constantly look at what day did this happen? What time did this happen? How is she processing this? And it's all this back and forth. And I don't think readers often appreciate just how laborious it is as authors to really track every little detail that we have to, and they just get to enjoy it.
I have many screens open and charts down. Okay, when did she do this? When did they do that? And I just found in my current work in progress, I totally had them meeting years before they're supposed to meet. And then don't talk about that meeting again until when they're supposed to. And I'm like, oh, that needs fixed.
Oh, it's
Didn't
a
catch it the
struggle.
first time through.
Understandably. And because you and I do have these like very intricate timelines that go across, how difficult is it for you when you realize that I do need to make this edit and multiple places to go back and find those places to edit it?
Wow, I think I read my books 100 times just for that reason alone. So I just learned on Scrivener, you can put colored tabs.
Oh.
I think it's Scrivener that does that. It might be Atticus. I think it's
Oh,
Scrivener.
I have Atticus.
I use both. And so I don't use Scrivener as much as Atticus, but I just learned, like I said, you can put the colored tabs. And so I'm thinking of transferring my work into progress in there and then putting colored tabs related to certain timelines. That way it's easier to find. All the yellows are here, all the pinks are here, etc. I'm going to give that a try and see if it'll help speed up the editing process with the timelines.
I'd have to look into that as well, because if it is applicable on Atticus, that'd be astronomically helpful. So you mentioned that you originally wrote this story without the intent of anybody reading it. How did that story really come to you? What were you visualizing it, anybody ever looking at it, since you didn't intend to publish it?
I never intended anybody else to look at it. It was just for me. It's my way of relaxing, releasing, processing through things. You know, emotions happen, and so it was just kind of for me. But my mom asked if she could read my book one day, and I was really hesitant. I was like, oh, I don't know, but I let her read it. She passed it and the other 3 manuscripts to all of her friends in her reading group, who said that if I don't publish, they would publish for me. And because I didn't want to lose control of what I wrote, I decided to go ahead and publish. So it was kind of weird for me to have somebody else read it. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. That's not peer pressure at all, but it's brilliant to have that kind of support.
It is amazing, but it was also,
I can only imagine. I didn't have that kind of support. If I did, I'd probably be like, whew, I gotta write faster. Has it changed at all for you, your process of writing, now that you do have an audience and people expecting to read your books?
It really hasn't, because I still look at it as I'm writing for the same reasons I wrote for in the first place. The only difference now is I feel like I have to write a little bit faster to get a book out, whereas before I could be more leisurely and set it down and come back and that kind of thing. But the intent is still there. All of my books, and I have like 7 more books planned, they're all on the same world, but some are standalone, some are, they talk about different people, but they are all written with the same idea that I originally went into this with.
That's fantastic. I love that. Just keeping it in the same universe. To some readers, they look at that and they're like, oh, that's easy, just to keep it in the same place. They don't understand how intricate it is. I think it's utterly brilliant, because there's so many different sides that could be taken from a single universe. You really don't need to branch outside of that. You just need to use what's inside of it. It is more than enough.
Exactly. The hard part about it is that I'm writing a prequel. That's what my duology is a prequel, if that's what you want to call it. I've already established things in first the series that I'm doing that we're talking about now, and I have to remember what those are and not infringe on that, or if I'm going to change things, give a reason. Originally, my people were not going to be thought of as demons. They were just an immortal race of people who fed on the fear of other species. Bringing in the human aspect to that world, that is something that humans associate with the mythology of demons, that fear. And so I decided to explore, what would happen if there was a race of people that this is perfectly natural. This is within their realm of what they do and how it's their culture and who they are. It's integral to who they are. And then there's these humans that come in and are like, whoa, wait, you're scary people. So I just kind of wanted to see what that dynamic would look like. My demons are definitely scary people, but they also have a kindness and a gentleness to them. And so I wanted to show that just because somebody thinks someone else is scary and evil and a demon, that's not always the case. There's always two sides. There's always different aspects. I just kind of wanted to show that, nobody's all black and nobody's all white. There is so much gray in the human emotions. So I tried to explore that within that demon-human relationship.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying about there being two sides to every part. There's good in us, there's bad in us, there's different ways to look at that. And so I'm curious, just because of that exploration of yours, was there some past trauma or difficulty that inspired this exploration of demons?
I didn't have a lot of trauma in my life at all. I've had a really good life, great mom. My mom was a single parent. Within her family, I saw not good things. The hidden depths of people that I've met throughout life, whether that be bullies at school or people who were bullied or different things I've seen on the news. I was like, there's got to be different aspects. Serial killers, for instance, everybody is like, he was so nice. I would never have expected that. Or are you sure? And then you find out all the horrible things that serial killer did. So the dichotomy of people is really interesting, that you can be so good on one hand and wow, what the heck were you thinking doing that on the other? That's kind of what inspired it.
I loved the fact that you incorporated sci-fi into your series, having it kind of an origin story of people coming from Earth. So I'm just curious, because this is mostly a fantasy book, what inspired that twist?
I tried to put my characters on Earth and it didn't work. And then I had a dream of a planet one night, and all of a sudden I was like, oh, okay, that's the planet my characters come from. So from there, I was able to build this world, and I'm like, well, now how do humans get there? Well, they have to travel. And so I was like, do I show that? Do I not? And I was like, no, if I show that, then it shows the human aspect traveling into the unknown, thinking they found this beautiful, wonderful place to live, with one person, Elena, the prophetess, the soon-to-be prophetess, saying, hey, people, this is bad, this is bad. And nobody would listen to her because she was 17 when that happened. And so I liked that you saw that transition from Earth to this planet, and then this whole new colonization. I've read books, I've seen, we hear about colonizing Mars and all that, and what would that look like? If we do colonize a planet, how do we know that there's nothing on it? So that was another aspect I wanted to explore.
Even moving from the far west, I lived in Wyoming and then we moved a little more east to Missouri. It's kind of a huge adjustment. There's a cultural adjustment even from state to state, but then there's also an adjustment in things like elevation, humidity, different plants, not to mention the people's ways of talking, the ways that they interact. But you made an entire world, and that's huge. And I don't think that readers really appreciate just how much detail is put into that. Your book in particular is phenomenal at doing this. You look at the different things that really have to happen as people come into a new planet. It's not just ex nihilo hello that suddenly it's there and everything works out well. It's not just that, I magically stepped into this fantasy world, now a prince is in love with me and life is great. If you're entering into these brand new worlds, there has to be a bigger adjustment. You're not just okay with it. You have to really, your immune system has to adjust. The air quality, trying to figure out what is edible, what is not. And you captured that with things like sickness and religion events. Can you kind of share a little bit more about that?
You're right. Just moving from one state to another, the differences can be drastic. So it was kind of like I have my 5 continents and they're all different enough. I do have similar things. For instance, the grass on my planet smells and tastes like mint. I just like that smell. So I was like, why not? Right. But it was poisonous to cows. So the cows that they brought with them all died. I wanted to explore the idea that when you do transplant a species from its native home to a whole nother, sometimes they thrive and sometimes they just don't. Oh, I was gonna say, I also liked the idea of having the humans have to adapt. And how do they adapt? They had to learn what animals they can use for milk and meat, and what plants they can use for medicine and food, and it's an adaptation. I think that sometimes stories, like you mentioned, the sci-fi and even fantasy, they forget that people can't just go from one place to another without that adaptation.
So, grief, particularly mourning, these are huge parts of your narrative. What were you exploring with that and the different expressions of it?
That's a good question. I've seen grief change people. Somebody dies, a tragic accident happens, somebody gets paralyzed, whatever. Everybody reacts a little bit different. So in my story, without giving it away, I do have a tragedy that happens in there, and it affects the whole world. I mean, and that's part of the prophecy, that something's going to happen that affects the world. And I have two of my demons who become obsessed with finding how to fix it. We've got to find the person that's destined to fix this issue. And one thinks it's going to happen outside the mist. The other one thinks that it's going to happen inside the mist. And that's carried through to book 2. And then I have one who he has grief because a person very close to him ends up unreachable. They can't get to them anymore. And so he naturally is kind of that, he's laid back and a little bit intense at the same time, but he turns to drugs and sex. And that's portrayed through book 1, 2, and 3. Tayan's my all-time favorite character. He's the one that him and a future prophetess start the book in year 825. My whole series takes place over 825 years. And so him and a prophetess start that. There's little snippets of their story throughout the whole book, the series, until book 4, where it is about him. He is the character that changes the most. He's happy. He's a good person. He's the best of both worlds, both human and demons. He is just a good guy. And when tragedy strikes, he lets grief swallow him and then decides, well, it's this person's fault, so therefore I'm going to go after them. He is why the humans call my Alluran people demons. He becomes that angry, grief-stricken, revengeful demon. I've read about it. I've seen it. I've seen those drastic changes in people. And I wanted to explore what that would look like, how somebody who was had it all and optimistic could become so filled with anger and grief. He thinks that if he can seek revenge, that the problem will go away. It'll fix. It will all unwind to some degree. I mean, he's smart. He knows it won't, but I think that's the mindset I gave him, is that by doing this, he thinks it'll all be okay. Then I do have another character in there, and I really can't say who without giving stories away, that decides that she can't live with what happened. She can't live with what she's done and with what happened within that tragedy. And so her choice is suicide. She just feels that's the best for her. I don't necessarily agree that it is, but there are people that choose that path because they think it's best for them. They don't think about who they leave behind. They don't think about the consequences. They think, I can't live on this world anymore, so this is the choice I have to make. And then, of course, that choice affects many other people within the story. And so I kind of wanted to show within those emotions how those decisions are made by the actual person, the individual themselves, without thought to how it affects other people. But yet I wanted to also show how it does affect other people.
Yeah, suicide and mourning, these are huge deals. What comes to my mind with them is something that I kind of have learned to call our empty. It's something that therapists have used before, but it's like a hole in us that happens when we lose somebody. And it's not necessarily something that we can fill, but we try to. We desperately try to fill this empty with other people, with other substances, with other things. And the fact that we have this empty no matter what we do sometimes drives people to do crazy things to try to get rid of it, because it's hard, it's heavy. We don't like to be empty as people, but the fact is that it always is there. Now, I am super religious, and I'm not saying that, healing doesn't come, but rather that the healing doesn't necessarily remove that empty from us. You can't replace another person. And I think that's divinely created. That hole in us when we lose other people, that is their absence, their separation for a while. And it's not just just something that, magically gets filled. You cannot replace it. It just is there. And we have to learn to live with it, essentially, to endure with it. But it's not just about losing people. Sometimes it's about losing a life that we never had or something that we used to have. Like for me, I suffer from a chronic condition and infertility. And the emptiness in me for the life that I had and the life that I will not have is an ongoing maneuver that I have to deal with this empty in me. Nothing's going to take away that empty that I don't get to have kids. Even if I were able to have foster kids, it's a different experience. But really that's just it, is we have to learn to accept, even embrace that empty.
And I like that you described it as the empty and learning to accept that part of you. I have the struggle with infertility. I only have one child. That's all I've ever been able to have, which he's a blessing. Love him with all my heart. He was born with Down syndrome, and there is a grief that people get, especially parents, when their child is born with a handicap or gets in an accident and something happens, or they get a chronic illness. And it is the grief for what could have been, which when I first learned about that, I thought was kind of funny, but that is exactly the grief that I experienced with that. It wasn't grief for me, it was grief for him and what could have been. He has a wonderful life and he's happy and healthy and great, and he's a man now, but I do still every once in a while grieve that he's not going to have children and he can't drive a car, and he's very capable in a lot of ways, but there's still that mothering. I didn't start him out with the best life because he can't do these things. And when I was younger and he was younger, that was really, really hard. Now, somewhere in there, I decided, you know what? If he didn't have Down syndrome, he wouldn't be the wonderful person that he is. And yes, maybe he can't drive a car, but oh my goodness, the things that he can do. That kid is so technically savvy. It's amazing. I can't do half the things he does. And so looking at that positive really helped me accept the empty. And I love that term again. His life is different, but it is still great. He has a girlfriend. He has a job. He has things that he enjoys doing. And so why do I take it upon myself to grieve what could have been? He doesn't. And so learning to accept the empty really made a big difference in how I processed that what could have been grief.
So yes, it's exactly about that. It is the reframing. We can choose to be buried under our emotions, under our empty, or we can grow with it, even around it. I love that you're looking at your son and you're seeing all of this goodness, this possibility that you hadn't seen before as possible. It is happening. These beautiful realities around us. We can choose to look at them and learn to move forward with them, or we can keep letting this emptiness, this difficulty, this should have been hold us down. And it's an interesting saying. People say you can either look forward or look back, but in reality, you're still moving forward even if you're looking back. It's really how you move. And so for myself, I don't personally like to ask why things happen. I think that's kind of a waste of time. Sometimes you get that why, but a lot of times you just don't. And it's difficult to live like that. I'd rather ask, what and how. What am I supposed to be doing with this? Or what can I do with this? How can I do with something? Or how can I live with it? How can I endure with it? Reframe it to be something empowering instead of something self-defeating. Now, suicide is another matter that you brought up in your book. And it's one that I feel like is very important to give a little bit of discussion or consideration for multiple reasons.
My uncle committed suicide before I was born. Then I knew 5 people who were supposed to graduate with me. One was very close to me personally who committed suicide. And I'd always thought, why? How selfish and all that sorts of thing. But when I had an eating disorder, I had all sorts of hormonal imbalances, and I came under times of having that sort of ideation myself. And for me, it was an interesting thing to learn that sometimes when you do feel that way, it's not so much about you, and you really are focused about the people around you. You want what's best for them. You want them to be happy. You want them to be whole. And for some reason, you're just a problem in their life. And it comes at various different angles. But I've also met individuals in my profession who have that sort of ideation, and it's got nothing to do with their any low self-esteem. It has nothing to do with thinking that they don't necessarily belong in the world so much as not being able to do something in the world that they're in. It's a different kind of form of empty. I always think deserves a different look. And so with my second book that's about to come out next month, there's a huge focus on suicide, because for me it is an exploration that sometimes taking a person's life isn't so much about feeling negative so much as dealing with this weird empty that's inside of them. So it's a curious point to me. I think can always be explored more deeply as far as that goes.
It's a subject
Yeah.
we don't talk a lot about. It's just taboo. And I think that that's sad because there are, like you said, there are reasons. We always associate it with grief or low self-esteem or whatever, but you're right. It may not be. It could definitely be. You think that the people around you would be better off without you, or you can't make a difference in the world, so why be here? Or, I mean, everybody's thought processes are very different on that aspect alone, on everything, but on that one alone.
A question that I've posed before that I think folks really struggle with is when it comes down to, we all say, it's my life and it's my body and I get to do what I want with it and so forth, and everyone agrees that yes, you have those rights. But then suddenly when it comes to, well, I should be able to take my own life, whether it's helped aided like medically or not, or it is just you doing it, then suddenly we're all like, no, we're repulsed by it because
Exactly.
suddenly you don't have a right because of your connection to others and the effect it has on others. So I'm always like, I'm curious at those ties of it because yes, our lives belong to us, but they also don't belong to us. We're very much connected as a human species to one another. So really,
Very much so.
we can't look at that. For me, I can't look at that as you have this right without there being an obligation and accountability. To me, it's too interconnected as humans to really say that I completely own my entire life without having that sort of connection with others. At the same time, I'm sure there's several more arguments that could be made against that. It's a situation that anytime, any angle that you look at that, I think we all have that empty or that pool inside of us that we're like, wait, what about me? What about so and so? What about how we feel and how it changes our reality? And
yes, I own myself and I belong to myself, but I also belong to my husband and my son and my mom and my relatives and my friends. And if I'm gone, then that string is removed from the Afghan that you've created, and it leaves an empty, it leaves a hole. And I don't think that we always think about, well, if we think I'm gone, it's not going to matter. But it does. It matters to everybody around us, whether that's just the cashier at the grocery store. You might have made an impact in their life. You don't know it until you're gone. Well, you wouldn't know it if you were gone, but you know what I mean.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And yeah, people say, folks will move on and whatnot, but really we're just adapting to this new reality. And it's, again, that empty is always there. It is never fixed. It is never filled. So every human life is worth an astronomical amount more than a singular person can detail. That's
Yes.
definitely something I continue to learn. Speaking on human lives, though, mistakes. I pulled out some interesting themes from your book about mistakes because, some mistakes were made and they had long-term consequences that nobody had intended, but still needed to be dealt with. So what do you have to say about that topic of mistakes as an exploration?
I think that comes under the realm of choice and consequences. And I think that choice is the central theme throughout my whole books. You get to choose what you do and how you react to it. You can choose to do something in anger or love or spontaneity, whatever. And you don't, in those kind of circumstances, you don't always think of, oh, what could happen if. And so when mistakes are made, if it's something simple like, oh, I misprinted a word, or I put that in the wrong place, that doesn't have a lot of far reaching effect. But when you have mistakes that you do are caused by anger or thoughtlessness, that can really affect that butterfly effect. It kind of ripples throughout time and the world. And I'm not wanting to say this to sound bad, so forgive me if it does. You hear the stories and the women who say, I got pregnant by mistake. That is, one, hard for the child to hear, but also that mistake that you made, now you have a child who has a child who has a child, and it is rippling on through eternity. That's not exactly what happened in my book by any means, but mistakes like that, you don't think about at the time, and they just ripple. And so mistakes are very easy to make. Thoughtless mistakes are very easy to make, and we don't realize how important they were or how meaningful or impactful they were until we've already made them. And now you have to go back. You can never fix the mistake, but you try to fix the repercussions.
Or at least you should. Yeah.
At least you should. And so my book kind of touches on trying to fix some of those repercussions and how that's not always possible.
It's a brilliant way to look at it because maybe I decided to just drink. Maybe it was I
Yeah,
didn't even overdrink, but then I got in this car and somebody died because of it. And I'm perfectly fine, but
exactly.
that has altered everybody who knew that person's reality from thence on. Just happening to be in the wrong place at the wrong time when something
Yes.
happens. Like
Yeah.
I've seen people end up comatose because of that, because an accident
Yeah.
happened and they just happened to be walking across the street. And it goes back to the accountability factor is there are some things within our control. There are some things that are
Mhm.
not within our control. But as far as the things in our control go, we should give a lot more thought and consideration to I make this choice and something goes wrong. Who is going to be hurt by it? And
Yeah.
sometimes it's as simple as I made a mistake and there are people hurt by it. Am I brave enough to reach out, to try to make amends, to try to do something, even if I know there's no possible way I could ever repair what I've done? Am I willing to be accountable for what I did? I mean,
Yeah.
that's why we have the law in place. And yes, the law isn't perfect because we're human.
Right.
But it's
Right.
about justice, holding people accountable for doing things that do harm others. And,
Yeah.
it's never such a simple argument as we got to treat people like people. It's we got to treat people like people, but we got to treat people like people within the scope of allowing what doesn't hurt people to proceed and stopping that which does.
And we always hear, well, it was just a mistake. It was a mistake. I didn't mean to. Now there's consequences. And so what are you going to do about that? How are you going to fix that? Are you going to try to even fix it? I mean, and again, that's your choice. It's your choice to fix it or not fix it. Sometimes you don't get that choice depending on what the mistake was. How you react to it and how you hold yourself accountable is definitely a choice that you have to make. So I think I've answered your question, but I also think that mistakes, there's no such thing as it was just a mistake.
It's never, never, never that simple. Everything is very, very layered, and that's
Yeah.
why it should give us pause. And I mean, again, that's why I appreciate your book so much, is that there is this much depth put into it that a person could read this and they can really draw personal meaning and take it to themselves to consider, well, in my own life, how does this apply and how can I be a better person because of it? I think that's the overall theme of it. To me, in books that are written with this much heart and intent, is you want your readers to really choose to be different because of it, to get something out of it. But I don't want to put words in your mouth. So for yourself,
No.
what are the things that you most hope that your readers will take away from your book?
I think that you basically hit on it. It's that you are responsible for your actions. You are responsible for your outcomes and your choices as much as any one person can be. And think about what your actions are doing and how they affect the people around you, and try to make the right choice. And I'm not saying be a martyr and give up your identity and your personality and everything. You can still be your own individual, but the conscious effort of thinking of other people, I think, is lacking sometimes. I also want people to see that one of the reasons I wrote it, because I have a hard time understanding depression because I don't feel it as much. And I have a lot of family and friends who are chronically depressed. And I never understood why they couldn't just snap out of it. And so I would always say that, well, just snap out of it, just stop being depressed. And so I think writing the story about grief and tragedy and all that kind of helped me process how people get where they get and why they get there. And it helped me become a more understanding and more caring person, which is beneficial in my writing, my day life, and my actual work life. And so I hope people look at it and see somebody who is grieving and angry and lashing out in anger and realizing that's not who they are. That's not the whole story. It's part of them, but for instance, like I'll bring it back to Tayan. He is happy and nice and teaches and cares and all of that, but grief changed him. And so looking at the gray, I think people need to look at the gray and not right and wrong, not black and white. We are a rainbow of colors and a million shades of gray. And we tend to meet somebody and see this color or this shade or this whatever. And that's who we think they are. And I want people to understand through reading my books that everybody has multifaceted emotions and backstories and thought processes, and you don't know what those are. It doesn't matter how close to a person you are, you will never fully know who they are. You got to just kind of think about that.
Brilliantly said. That's very, very well articulated. Thank you. We ought to have more curiosity about one another. Everybody is a living and walking mystery, and it is up to us to put together the clues to discover who they are. And really, at the core of it, when you truly look at a person, discovering what they are, what goes into all of that you see, and what goes in that you don't see, it's very, very difficult to not love people, to not have some sort of connection and compassion with them. And when you do, it's brilliantly opens up the world for you. So I love that you're sharing that with your readers. I personally have been very touched by receiving that from your book and from this discussion. So thank you so much. I really do appreciate it.
Well, I'm glad. As a writer, you never know how somebody's going to perceive your books. You're never sure if they're going to take what you're saying wrong or the way you want it to, because everybody is coming from a different background and a different walk of life. And we're all different. We're all individuals. And so I like that you got what I was going for with it. But also, I hope that people who don't want to get meaning can still enjoy.
And I do think that they will. For everybody viewing, I do always encourage readers, listen to conversations like these, discover more about what the author put behind it, because there's always so much more to the story that is going to just make your entire perspective of it different, but also change you for the better. So again, I want to thank you for being on this podcast. And for all the viewers, Louella's book will be in the description below. Please check it out. Check out her series. You can follow her on Instagram. Well, thank you so much, Louella. I really do appreciate your time. For all the viewers, please subscribe to this channel so that we can continue to support indie authors, and we will see you next week.
Thank you for inviting me.